and thank you so much for joining me tonight for some crafting. I have no idea what to call tonight's technique. Honestly, I just had so much fun. I had a little idea in my head, I went with it, and it worked out really well, and I'm so pleased with the end results. I'm using a stencil and some inks tonight, as well as some stamps. Any stencil should do, but the bigger the gap in the stencil, the better it looks, because we want more ink going down on our paper. So we're creating a little background, doing a bit of ink blending. So I'm using Lisa Horton inks, I'm using Loganberry, Woodland, Moss, and Rum and Raisin. And I am doing super simple ink blending. So I'm trying to do 3 equal sections on my background. So I'm starting out with the Loganberry and then going into Woodland, Moss, and then Rum and Raisin. The Rum and Raisin and Loganberry are very similar colors, but one's a bit more pink and one's a bit more purple. But I love how these 3 colors look together. Any inks will work in your stash. Dye inks and pigment inks will work. Whatever you've got, just use that. And then I'm going to keep those inks on my desk, and I'm going to grab some stamps. Now, it works best when you have solid image stamps. So you don't want to have outline stamps. You want solid image stamps. This works so much better, and I'll show you the difference towards the end of the video where I did an outline stamp and how it looks. And I think you'll agree it looks so much better with a solid image stamp. Now all we're going to do is kind of fill up our background. Now if you have a background stamp, that will work as well, and that might be easier and quicker because you won't have to move about your stamps. But all I'm doing is trying to stamp the same color in the same place as my background ink blending. So I am stamping down my ink, and I'm kind of inking up this first half of my stamps, and then where it kind of changes to green, I'm coming in with the green. And if I need to, I'll use a little ink dauber to kind of blend those inks together on the stamps itself, just so I don't get any sharp edges and so I don't cross-contaminate my inks and kind of end up with my ink pads overlapping each other and then getting the purple in the green or vice versa. So using an ink blending tool is a really handy thing to do if you want to kind of merge those colors together, but you don't want your ink pads to kind of squish over top of each other. So I'm simply just kind of lining up with my stamp platform and having a look through the little window before I press it down to make sure that I've not got any ink where I don't want it to go. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't need to be absolutely amazing. And if you kind of didn't get one edge quite right, you can kind of come in again with your ink and just overlap it, because the inks will sort of blend together nicely and overlap nicely. And to avoid those sharp edges, like I said, you can use an ink blending tool and kind of soften those edges. So you can see here I'm just working my way down the card, moving my stamps as I go, and this took less than 10 minutes to do. It really didn't take that long, and I was watching a movie while I was doing it, so it doesn't involve huge amounts of brain power, which I always love. I love nice, easy, relaxing crafting, especially when I've got lots going on. This is perfect. This is therapy. I love doing it. So I love how this turned out. I just simply followed the same colors I did for my background and stamped the images over top, and I love how it looks. I think it looks stunning. Again, if you have a background stamp, you could do that with your background stamp and just kind of blend it and merge it. But I really liked these individual stamps, and I wanted to have slightly larger gaps. I didn't want to have the whole background filled up. I wanted to have a nice bit of space. Next card, I'm using a Dolly Dimples stencil, and this is the Exotic Flowers number 24. And I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. I'm switching up my inks. I'm going to use my Memento inks, which are also dye inks. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a background. I wanted to change them up because the Lisa Horton inks were more of a matte based ink, very similar to Distress Oxides, and these ones are just your sort of standard dye inks. So I'm going to go ahead and do an ink blended background. I'm going very light-handed with my inking. I'm trying to keep it light because these ones are a lot more saturated in color and a lot more bright and bold. So I wanted to go a bit more light-handed so that when I stamp, it can be a lot more dark and it will stand out a bit more. So do bear that in mind when you're using your inks, that when you are stenciling the background, you might want to go a bit lighter handed if it's going to make it difficult to see that inking on the top when you stamp with it a second time. So here you can see I'm kind of covering up that harsh line. Some of my ink pads are a lot more juicy than others, so therefore you get a lot more ink going down onto that stamp, and you can just take one of those ink daubers and just sort of remove some of that ink. Now, all the products I use today in my video will be in the description box if you want to find any of them, if you have any questions about them, the measurements, where they're bought from, that will all be in the description box, so you can just click the link and then you can have a look for yourself. I do make affiliate sales on some of the links, and I do appreciate when you guys use those because it does earn me a little bit of an income and it doesn't cost you anything more. I'm so grateful when you do use those links. Right, so finishing off this card, I'm going on to my blue colored ink and again softening those lines, those harsh lines between each of the stamping, and just kind of gradually moving my stamps down the card. You can do this with any stamps that you've got in your stash if they're a solid stamp. So you could make Christmas cards, you could do birthday cards, you could do condolence cards. I mean, this works so well to make a beautiful, stunning background with colors that really pop, and you only need a couple ink pads. You could just do it in one color if you wanted. If you only had one color, just do your background really lightly and then do your stamping over top with just one color, and it would look great as well. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit for my last card. Or my last two cards. I'm going to use Loganberry, Woodland Moss, and then Stormy Sky from Distress Oxides. And this one I wanted to do some butterflies, so I don't know if this stamp set's still available or not, but this is a Catherine Pooler one, and this is how it turned out. I love it, and I felt like just a simple sentiment on the front of this would look really, really beautiful in that black ink. And here again is the same exact colors, but I did it with a Christmas stamp, and I didn't have any solid image Christmas stamps, so I found this one here in this set, so I decided to use that, and I just used the one stamp. That's all I had. That was the only solid Christmassy looking stamp I had, so that's what I used. Now here's the version where I did the outline stamp, and it just isn't as effective. Those gaps between the stamps, it just doesn't pop off the card. It kind of blends into the background a bit too much. It's not as nice. That's why I'm saying if you use a solid stamp, it will look so much better. Now for my first card, I really wanted to kind of have a little border around it, but I've been getting a little bit frustrated lately because every time I cut my cardstock, I cut it slightly wonky or not perfect, and I just wanted like the tiniest, thinnest little black edge to it. And then I remembered that you can just color your edge, and it's so much easier. So I grabbed my mint tape, which is a low tack post-it note like tape from scrapbookdotcom, and I'm using that just to kind of cover up the edge. You could just take a scrap bit of paper and do the same thing, and I am covering it all the way up just to the very, very teensy little edge of the card, and then I'm taking my black ink and going ahead and filling that in, and you just get this gorgeous little black border with such little faff. I mean, it does look like I'm making a hot mess here, but it took just a few seconds. I did pick up some ink on the back side of my tape, so I made sure to switch up my tape. And I do save all my tape, so when that's all dry, I'll use it again. But here you can see that tiny, tiny little black border, and that's all I wanted. I wanted it to go onto my card base and just kind of pop off a little bit. And I did make sure that before I started, I cut all of my card fronts down before I even started doing my inking, so that they're just a nice sort of 0.5 centimeter smaller than my card base. So I found this fun holographic kind of spotty card in my stash, and I decided to cut myself a little matting layer behind it. And then I wanted to put some strips on it. So the easiest way to do strips, I find, you could do glue, but if you want really thin strips, it can be really messy, especially when you've got like a foil cardstock. That can really squish out and make a big mess. So I just take my cheap double-sided tape and stick it on the back of my cardstock, and then take my paper trimmer and cut myself some little slivers of cardstock. So I go ahead and make myself 3. I do cut a couple off first because it was a bit wonky, and then I finally got some nice straight ones, and then I decided to do 3 strips in 3 different sizes that I could then put on the front of the card. And just adding that little bit of double-sided tape onto the back just makes it so quick and easy to put these little strips onto your card, and no mess, no glue seeping out anywhere, and it's such a great trick to do. Once I've got those little strips stuck down, I can then go ahead and attach it to my backing layer and then put it onto a card base. Now for this one, I wanted to have just a sentiment on the top. I didn't want to have too much take away from that gorgeous background. So I dug through my stash, found a happy birthday one and then a Christmas one, so I could do the Christmas card and the birthday card the same. I did switch up my mind with the dies. I used the infinity circle dies on one of my cards, and then I switched up for a different set of dies for the other card. But a nice simple sentiment going on the front just is all you need. You've got this gorgeous background. You don't need a huge extravagant sentiment to go on. I use the same inks that I used for my background as well, and so the kind of middle color is the color I stamped my sentiment in, and then I'm just going to pop it up with a bit of foam tape and stick that right onto the middle of the card. And I love how these ones turned out. I used regular holographic cardstock rather than this sort of bubbly cardstock, and I felt like that was enough of a change in the background, but also kept it a little bit similar that it makes it stand out just a bit more. I did feel like I wanted a tiny bit more bling, so on both of my cards I added on a bit of sort of sparkle. So I had these holographic iridescent little flat back sequins. I'm using my homemade Pick Me Up tool, which is just blue tack on the end of a chopstick. It works perfect. I always stick down my glue first, just kind of blob it wherever I think I want to put some of these little sequin things, and then I can pick them up with my blue tack. And then I use a pokey tool just to kind of pop them off of the blue tack onto the card. Works a dream every time and costs pretty much nothing. So that was the first one, and then on the second one I went in with some gems instead, and so I used some holographic sort of sparkly gems and popped those on to where the dots were on the stamp. And I love how they turned out. I feel like they're really, really beautiful. I love the color on color. I think it's worked out perfect. For this one here, that was the one that I did a black edge on off screen, and I added some of those same flat back sort of holeless sequins. And then this one, I just took those colorful gems, or the normal gems, and I colored them black to match my sort of black edging around the card, and added a thank you on the top, stacked 3 times. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you really enjoyed this one as much as I did. I hope you give it a go as well. All the links are down in the description box for you, as well as links to my social media and my Facebook group if you want to join me over there. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you next week. Bye!